Hi everyone, I am Hessie Jones, and tonight we have our first blended panel. So we have Gen X, Gen Y, and Boomers on our panel talking about the multi-generational workforce. So this will be an interesting one because this is a hot topic right now as everybody starts to talk about the future of work. And so you know, like right now, for the first time in history, the workplace demographics have actually spanned 4 generations. So it's not only Gen X, Gen Y, and Boomers. We also have the traditional generation. And so that means that 20-year-old new hires are actually working beside people that are even 50 years older than they are. And so this mix of generations is attributed primarily to labor shortages in a lot of the industries. But also, there's a rising age of retirement. So a lot of the let's say generations that would have normally retired at the age of 65 are not retiring anymore because of financial issues or because they don't want to. So one thing is that in 2006, the Boomers actually held the majority of positions and influence across organizations in the United States and Canada and around the world. But what they're saying is that by 2025, the millennial generation will actually outpace all the generations and be and encompass about 75% of the workforce. But until then, so there's still 10 years until that happens, right? So we still have this mix of generations in the workforce that needs to be addressed. And so what we're seeing is the shifts in corporate culture that have to kind of adapt to everybody's attitudes, their priorities, their needs based on you know, their experiences and what they're used to. This all has to be addressed at one point or another. Okay. So before we delve into the questions, what I want to do is I want to ask everybody to state your name, what generation you're from, and briefly what you do. Okay. So I'm going to start to my left. Mary, do you want to start?
Sure. Hey everybody, I'm Mary. I work in IT support for a title industry company that's nationwide. I manage application support at this point, but provide technical support for any issues that come up for any of our companies.
Okay. And you are a Gen Xer, right?
Yes.
Gen
Yes.
X. Okay. And Michelle.
Hi, my name is Michelle Price, on Twitter @ProsperityGal, and I have a digital media agency and a business radio show. And of course, I'm a Boomer.
Excellent. Thank you. And Ryan?
Sorry, they're in a different order on the bottom of my screen. My name's Ryan Pennell. I'm Gen X. I'm a hedge fund manager. Yeah, that's it, isn't it?
Did you say
something like that? That's it. I was getting wound up to go into more of a spiel, but that's. Do
you want to say anything else? You could, you know, whatever. Anything interesting about you that you want to say?
I'm going to try not to rant.
Okay. Okay.
I promise Hessie not to rant.
I don't mind ranting because you know what? There are other generations that will probably be just as loud or louder than you, so that's okay. Okay.
All right. I look forward to that challenge.
Okay. Great. Okay, Samantha.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I'm a millennial, a younger millennial, and I currently work in public interest research. So that's kind of in the realm of nonprofits. I work with a lot of students. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, perfect. And Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm a Boomer, obviously. In technology sales for the last 35 years. Right now, my primary focus is in social media tech.
Okay, perfect. And last but not least, Tiffany.
Hi, Tiffany Daniels. I am a millennial or Gen Y-er, an older millennial. I work in communications for a nonprofit involved in workforce development.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Tiffany. Okay, so I'm going to start off by asking everyone, and this will start to lay the groundwork for the differences in generations, but what motivates you to excel at your job? Okay, regardless. So why don't we start with Mary? What motivates you? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's not my laptop, so I'm a little rusty with the screen.
Okay.
My motivation is entirely personal. Mine is a work ethic from the time I was raised. It's compensation doesn't mean as much. The benefits work better. I work from anywhere I want. I have flex time, but my work ethic, my work products, the drive to build a better team, everything is entirely from a personal pride standpoint.
Has that changed since what you said that since when you were raised? Has that changed over time as you gain more experience in the workforce?
Not at all. Okay. No, everything is about all of my motivation is about the pride in my work and job well done.
Okay, perfect. Let's talk to Ryan about this as another Gen Xer. What do you think about that? Do you concur?
Yeah, I would say, it's not a societal thing. It's a self-generated requirement to be excellent at what I do. I picked this job because it's extremely difficult and it's unforgiving, and I enjoy doing well in that environment. It's challenging. Obviously there's a requirement. If I don't do well, people don't invest and I get ultimately fired. But that's not the reason that I do well. I don't think, oh God, I'm going to be unemployed or something like that. I just
right.
I want to do well. I'm driven to do well.
I'm wondering if there's a difference between also being an entrepreneur and actually being in a workplace environment. Can I ask Tiffany, because you're not necessarily an entrepreneur, what drives you?
I don't know that I'm driven by anything other than what Mary and Ryan have said. If I was driven by a paycheck, I wouldn't be in a nonprofit and community service. So I think that is definitely one thing that a lot of people take into consideration when they consider the industries that they work in. As far as why I go into work every day and why I work hard rather than just kind of working for a paycheck is because I take pride in what I do. There's nothing different than when I was in school. I worked hard so that I could have the pride or the comfort or whatever of having a good grade and having a good report. When I go into work, it's because I know that at the end of the day, whatever my result is as hard as I could work or as good as I could make it. And there's always going to be room for improvement, so I don't expect that I'll reach a point of perfection or boredom, because there's always going to be something else I have to learn, whether it's just because it's the personalities I'm working with or new technologies, new expectations. But I can't say that the paycheck is what drives me, because I'm not in an industry where that would really be the end goal for a lot of people.
Okay. No, that's fair. Now, Samantha.
Yes.
Okay. I want to hear from you, because you're one passionate young millennial, and I know the paycheck does not necessarily drive you. So.
I'm working 26 hours a week. I'm doing a part-time gig at a nonprofit that's housed in a university that's paid by student fees. So, if you want to talk about people not working for the paycheck, it would definitely be the people in my industry. And I think also I notice a difference between us as the nonprofit and the work that I do on campus too. So people who are making twice as much as me, if not 3 times as much as me in certain meetings, and the way that we interact with the students. So I think what drives me is I remember what it's like to be a student. I also work very hard with marginalized individuals, so that's what makes me passionate to work within my job.
Okay. Okay, so let's hear from the boomers. Steve?
Wow. Motivation is a very complex question, obviously. Money is a big part of everything. I'm a incentive-driven sales type, but not everything. In fact, I find that doing a good job, generating value, bringing folks that work with me along, mentoring, is all part of what gets me up in the morning.
Has this changed for you over time?
It has.
What?
It has.
And just taking consideration what both Tiffany and Samantha have said, because they've just, let's say, recently come out of school in the last like 3-4 years. When you were coming out of school, if you do remember, I'm sure you do. I apologize. I didn't mean to say that. I'm sure you do. I just did a faux pas, and I'm sorry.
No, that was ideal.
What motivated you at the time when you were just getting into work?
Wow. When I came out of school, got married when we were in our early 20s, had kids when we were 25. So the ultimate motivation was earning enough to support a family.
Okay.
Which is basically what drove me to wherever I am today.
Okay.
Very different than a lot of folks are experiencing right now.
Okay. Okay. So Michelle, what do you think about that? And also provide your experience in whether or not it's evolved, like your motivation has evolved over time as well.
So I've always been driven by excellence, and I've learned over a period of time that can evolve, change, morph into a lot of different things. So it's layered. Interestingly enough, about 15 years ago, I realized that I had kind of uncovered for myself that I wanted to make a difference as well as a profit. I have an issue with people who use making money as a tool to shame people. Because I think it's kind of interesting that sometimes the dialogue can come around to, well, you're just in it for the money. Well, do you really know that? And why is there anything wrong with making good money at what you're good at? I don't think it's an either or. I think it can be both. And I'd like to see more people have a conversation about how can we make it both. It doesn't have to be either or.
But does it have to be the prime motivator? See, that's one thing, right? And like what Steve was talking about, it may be different when you're in a sales capacity. But I mean, Ryan is also in an industry where money is a motivator at the same time. But intrinsically, I mean, if you want to get up, to be able to get up in the morning, is it the money that's going to get you up in the morning, or is it something else?
I think when people think it's the money, they don't really understand who they are. So I'm going to have a different advantage in this conversation than some people are. I think the less you know about who you are, the more you're going to answer, the more you're going to give an answer that's not true, it's not accurate, and it doesn't go to the core of the question. Money is a result of doing something really well. And so that's why I recognize that I'm driven by excellence. Money can be one of the results of being driven by excellence. It's not the only one, but I see too many times people throw balls at boomers. Oh, you guys are all about the money, y'all. You know, I'm like, no, everybody needs money. So let's don't use money as a tool to shame people. Let's find out what's really at the core of who they are and what drives them. And if they don't know, then help them discover that. But I think one of the biggest challenges anytime you start having conversations around the generations is that just intrinsically when you look at the fact that if you're a millennial, you haven't lived life as long as a boomer. That doesn't make you less than a person, but you also don't have the same level of wisdom, because I can morph back into my memory of what I was like when I was 20 versus who I am today. And I didn't have, of course I'm not going to have the same kind of experience. Of course I'm not going to have the same kind of answers. And of course I'm not going to understand who I am because I haven't lived as many crises and challenges and I haven't been tested as much.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. And I think when we talk about money, and you're right, experience is one thing, but I think over time, like money plays a different role. And I looked at Tiffany when you put up your post on the side. For somebody just getting out of school, we have to also realize from their perspective, the money is what also helps pay off their debt, right? And for a lot of millennials getting out of school, it's okay, I have this huge burden, and yes, I have to build a career, but I also have this other thing that's weighing on me that I have to relieve, right?
Well, I think what's really interesting about that, Hessie, is that millennials are talking about the debt that they deal with when they come out of school, but that's not any different, and Stephen can back me up on this, that when a young couple goes and buys a house, and when you get mired down with having cars because both of you have to work, when, you know, you're having to save for an education for your children. I mean, those are all things that happen to everyone if they go the route of having a family. So we still had to deal with debt.
Yes.
And some of us actually lost everything we had multiple times. I've lost everything I've had 3 times. So my focus now as a boomer and a single woman is I've got to remake all that shit I was supposed to already had by now.
Mm-hmm. So can I hear from Tiffany or Samantha on this? I want to hear your perspective based on what Michelle had said.
Sure. I mean, for me, I as a 30-year-old have more than just student loan debt. So just kind of the last comment about, you know, mortgages and car notes, that's not unique to any generation. I think it's just the way, especially living in the countries that we live in, since it's not just the U.S., we're Canada represented as well, but living where we live, those things are expected. A lot of millennials have put off the mortgage, I think, for a longer period of time, but the other aspects of just normal life have not changed. We often hear about millennials moving back home, and yes, there's a high percentage, but it is not as high as the media wants to make it. A lot of us are responsible for ourselves, good, bad, or indifferent. And so, you know, as a millennial for myself, working in nonprofit, it's not because I made some heartfelt, conscious choice. I would love to say that was the case, but it wasn't. It was just I went into school, I got a degree, I found a job in that degree, I was laid off. I found another job as quickly as possible, and the route and the connections I made led me into nonprofit. But the reason that I'm still there is not is because I enjoy the people that I'm working with and the work that I'm doing. I could make more money doing the same thing that I'm doing in corporate America. Now, when I complain about my debt, then the first question would be, well, then why don't you just leave and make more money? Why are you suffering, which is not what I believe all people in nonprofits do, but why are you sacrificing, or whatever other term you want to use? And it's simply because I'm comfortable and I enjoy this work and I trust it, but at some point I either have to stop complaining about my debt or I need to get uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, I hear. I saw Samantha nodding your head. You're totally on board with that, right?
Well, I mean, like, I also grew up in an immigrant family, so I mean, you learn very quickly the value of a dollar, and you learn very quickly not to complain because, oh, if you want to complain, why don't we ship you back to the Philippines and see how that is? So, like, I think, like, there's a talk about classism here that we're not really getting into, and I think that's huge for any generation, that there are wealthy people and there are poor people, and how that means you operate is very different. And I mean, someone who came from, like, you know, we started in lower socioeconomic status and now we're middle class, and like, what does that mean for how I grew up and how I learned how to deal with money and debt and that sort of thing? While someone who has, you know, high social status would take out, we have something called OSAP here, so I don't know what it's called in the States for student loans, but you can get OSAP for like almost anything to a certain degree, and I see kids who spend it on, like, you know, like drinking and things like that because they come from high class backgrounds. They don't understand the value of that money that they're getting. So I think that's something in the conversation that we're talking about here, is that people who have come from poor backgrounds understand the impact of debt to a higher extent than someone who has no history of it.
I totally agree with it. Mary, did you want to weigh in on that? Because you had some interesting things to say. You said it's not class.
No, that's not class at all. That is money management. Not that I came from a high-end background, but I came from lower middle-class America, was never taught anything about debt, about money management. Tiffany, I want to tell you that I absolutely believe that when you're working where you love, the money comes, because that's what you're doing. What you put out is what you get back. And it just eventually does work. It took forever for me. I mean, I'm on the same point. Mine wasn't from tragedy or loss. Mine was choice. I chose to move multiple times. This is the longest I've ever lived anywhere. But I used my student loans for stupid stuff. I bought a car. Um, it was just, and I was 28 when I did that. It wasn't about my class situation at the time. It was about a not knowing what to do with money, how to manage debt, how to manage credit, what to do with credit. It's about not knowing what to do with that. And it wasn't until after I became a single mother and had more somebody dependent on me that I realized that I needed to learn it. I honestly think that in today's day and age, millennials have a better understanding of debt and have better exposure to it and have more resources because the resources are there online. It wasn't something that was talked about. It wasn't something that was admitted to. People had horrible credit in the 70s and 80s and just never talked about it. So it wasn't something that was ever taught to openly like it is now.
Okay. No, this is a good discussion because it seems like there is a difference across the board, especially when it comes to where you are. But you know what, from what Mary says and from what Tiffany says, there is a graying of the lines, and I don't think that there's much of a difference in motivation sometimes even between generations. I want to get to the next question because I want to start talking about the workforce dynamics. And if I could start with, let's say, Ryan. Can you please finish the sentence? I prefer to have a manager who blank.
Can work effectively autonomously, I would say.
Okay.
I've had many managers. I have many managers now, and I, as you know, Hessie, I actually moved out of my office. I went in one day and I said, I'm not coming to work anymore. You don't need me to be here. I'm on chat, I'm on email, I'm on phone, text, whatever you need. My job is not one of the, oh, hey, I need to get this right away thing. I work completely autonomously managing the portfolio. There's a whole group of gifted managers that manage people underneath me. And what I found is when I was in the shop, what all the managers would do, except for one, would be to offload the responsibility onto me, because I'm there, I'm available. So when it fell to them to address a situation, I'm a door knock away. So you get that, oh hey, just quick question, and it was something that I would never normally answer. So they just, as soon as I wasn't there, half of them we let go because they couldn't manage, and the other half just. It's not like then they reach out via instant message or chat or anything else to say, oh, hey, I just have a quick question. They just deal with it because they're capable. So I prefer that in a manager. That's what you're paying for, is for them to manage something.
Okay. Okay. What do you think, Steve? You didn't answer from the last question, so I want you to start on this one. Who you answer to, and what. From your perspective, would your ideal manager look like?
Well, first of all, I've been very independent my whole career. I personally don't do well in offices, per se. I find them very distracting. So my best manager is someone that gives me guidelines, helps me understand what needs to be accomplished, and lets me go do it.
Okay.
So I'm probably not the best example of what you're looking for, but typically the best managers are people who manage up, not down. People don't like direction unless they're in a type of job where it's repetitive and they're basically doing the same thing over and over and over again. Professional managers are best leaving people alone, supporting their people upwards, guarding against anything that might go wrong, prepared to absorb blame, and prepared to broadcast positive activity. That's typically the way I've managed my staff. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
But it's about independent drive.
Yeah. And there's, and I'm not trying to perpetuate stereotypes, but I did actually see a chart that talked about this. And from a boomer standpoint, there's this value where a lot of boomers want the independence, but they also want to be supported. They want to be defended by their manager, and it's like you said, they want to manage up, but they want to be able to be given a certain amount of independence to do the job right. Mm-hmm. So that's bang on with that. Now, what about Tiffany?
Yeah. I think I'm just thinking back on the managers that I've had, and it really depended on the job. In positions where I was in a company that we all kind of did the same things. I worked for a PR firm, so it was one's goal. Everyone had their their specifics, but in that case, I wanted a manager that could teach me. I wanted someone who had done things, had experienced things, and could guide me to serve as a mentor. In my current area, my manager is the head of the organization and is not focused or has an expertise in what I do. So he definitely has goals that he wants us to reach and opinions, but as far as mentorship in specific task-oriented or job-specific roles, he doesn't have that for me. And so in that case, what I'm looking for is someone who can help to clear as many paths as possible, not making my job easier, but to cover the things that have nothing to do with me, because sometimes we can get very mired in all of the pieces responsible for an organization, all of the things going on, and people aren't as successful because they're not able to do their job. They're somehow held responsible for things that are completely out of their control, that they can't influence positively or negatively. So if it's somewhere like the PR firm, I want to learn. I want to mentor. If it's not, then I want someone who is helping me to understand the bigger picture for the overall organization.
Now, you mentioned that's an interesting thing, and one thing that I'm finding is that even now, today, there's this whole discussion about mentorship in an organization, and I don't know about you guys, and I'm a Gen Xer myself, but when I was younger, I don't think we had that privilege. I don't know, Ryan or Mary, do you remember any of that? Because from a boss perspective, can your boss also be a mentor?
Mine was, for sure. I think, I don't know if it was you and I that were talking about this the last time we met, Hesse, but we were talking about the lack of mentors for millennials, and that, when I entered the workforce, I had a boss. I mean, I was lowest guy on the totem pole, but I have a boss who had been in the business for 35 years and had been mentored himself by someone who'd been in the business for 30 or 40 years, and so on and so forth. And there was a mechanism whereby these guys would hand over this information, this hard-won knowledge that you could not get at school. Your parents couldn't teach it to you. It just wasn't available innately in any way outside of being mentored in this capacity, and they invested in you because whether they were a partner in the company or they owned the company or had shares or not, it still invested a majority of their life into this company, and they wanted to make sure that the person who was going to take it over wasn't a complete idiot. So they would groom you until they retired, and they gracefully retire, and they would leave it in your care, or they'd fire you and find somebody who could. And when I'm a bad one for complaining about the lack of any acumen at all from any millennial that we hire. I have those kill stamps. That's another story. But anyway,
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But and people say, well, who's to blame? And I say, well, it's a combination of their parents and us, because when it came our turn to mentor this generation, we didn't do it. Right? When you were 35 or 36 or 37 and your 25-year-old or 24-year-old kid came in at the bottom end of the department, we were and I'm speaking for the Gen Xers here, we were the original FU generation. So when these kids came in, instead of saying, oh, hey, let me help you out, and let me help pass along some of this information, we sort of looked at them and said, well, screw you, good luck with that. Why don't you make it on your own, sort of thing. Give them no help whatsoever. We welched on our obligation, and then turn around and complain about the fact that these kids build no acumen and have no fundamental business skills. Kind of sad, but I mean, I attribute a lot of my basic core capabilities in business to the gifts that particular mentor shared with me. I mean, there was no other way I was going to get it. It was invaluable, and I apply a majority of it today, to this day.
Is there anybody else on the panel that was like Ryan, that actually had the benefit of having a mentor? Michelle,
Yep.
have you had a mentor? Or sorry, I want to ask a boomer first, because the reason being is that I don't know whether or not this is a pervasive thing, that, you know, the whole idea of mentorship.
That probably is something that happens more in corporate America. Having been an entrepreneur for 30 years, there really wasn't too many people I could turn to for mentorship, because my first 3 businesses were all in male-oriented industries. So luckily enough, I had to kind of turn to my husband at the time, and we each operated from our strengths, and we had each other's back. And so, for example, when I'm out there in the field and a real estate broker tries to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and you know, I walk up and go, all right, so can you tell me which one of these is a 12 gauge and which one's a 10 gauge? and just had to be able to exhibit my knowledge, and I just had to gain it all from asking really good questions and just acquiring the knowledge and doing the work. So there wasn't anybody who could mentor me.
Okay. Now, Samantha, you had a mentor?
So I luckily, when I was working for my students union way back a few years now, the DERPA, so Director of Research and Political Advocacy, at the neighboring university, was actually someone that took me under their wing a little bit. And when I started working for that other university, we just kind of continued on our friendship. But he was I took this role as an executive director of a nonprofit at another university, and he very much was helping with financial things, making sure that I was kept up to date. Even though he wasn't technically my mentor in my job, he was very much making sure that I was on the right track. And even now that I'm like provinces away, I still regularly talk to them about things that I'm doing within my job, that sort of thing. And I found that all of the people that are currently in my position or in my job atmosphere, and there's 3 of us, all of us have worked in hierarchies before where we've been groomed, I would say, to be in coordinator or management roles. And now that we're in a flat structure, so there's no hierarchies, we all are in the same structure with a board that regulates what we do. We've learned to mentor each other and mentor the board, and the board's learned to mentor us. So it's a really interesting ecosystem that, because I think we were set up to learn how to share gifts and share how to do things, we've learned how to transfer that over into our workplace.
Are you starting to see, I know it's your workplace is a little bit different, but I mean, do you think this is prevalent within your generation, where people your age are starting to seek out people with more experience to help guide them in different aspects of their career?
I think we are kind of driven to be, and I'm using very general talk, which I don't like using, but I think we're much more driven to be jack of all trades, because the job market isn't as lucrative as it used to be. So having as many things in your pocket, it is like the best thing possible. So like Mary asks in the chat, like, share gifts. So like I do volunteer management. One of my other partners does the marketing side, and then we have an office coordinator who does all our finances. But our finance coordinator will teach us how to do like some of the more financy things that I don't really understand nearly to the same extent, while we're sharing our management tips with each person. So it kind of goes into this like circle.
Right.
But I think that's all driven because you want to have the biggest, fattest like resume, because you never know what's going to happen in the job market now, and because we don't have seniority and most of us work contracts, we have to make sure we are the most lucrative candidate.
I want to dive into that later on, about how it's changing, and the fact that there is more contract and freelance and all that stuff. But before we get to that, the one thing that I want you guys to talk about now is, how do you communicate at work? And more specifically, what are the communication challenges, especially, let's say, between generations? Who wants to talk about that first? Anybody? Mary's smiling.
Again, I have a difficult fit in here. I work in IT.
Okay.
I send 300 emails a day. That's just what I send. It's not what I receive. It's not. There's other communication platforms, telephone, instant messaging, including. I update statuses for my customers on my Facebook page because I have customers that are connected to me. How I communicate is not an issue. How I communicate with different generations is not an issue. I have boomers on my Facebook. I text message with every age that you can think of. I don't see a limitation on that. Partly because I'm in IT, because this is what I do. The people that want the information from our IT department about what I support will learn the technology. They'll learn to communicate in the most effective way possible. I have the same thing with my real estate agents. If they want the speed, if they want the drive, if they want to stay on top, they will learn the technology and find the fastest ways possible.
Okay. Ryan?
I guess, I mean, I know I complain about the communication, well, only between the millennials, and I'm not hating on millennials, I'm really not. But having said that, I guess the issue that I have with communication is that there's, and I don't know if this is a failing of ours because we dropped the ball on mentoring or whatnot, but there's a complete lack of etiquette understanding that I experience often when communicating with millennials. I've never met one like Samantha ever, for sure. Like, she's talking and I'm going, okay, if she wasn't nonprofit, I would hire her in a second. But you know, when the summer intern reaches out to his boss's boss's boss and says, "Hey Ryan," as a first email, I mean, you're sitting there going, okay, I don't need to be called Mr. and I don't like Sir, but you got to be kidding me. Like, you know, there were 100 of you that applied for this job. You got it. I've said through the grapevine, sure, I'll take a call with this kid and, you know, walk through some things with him, and it's not like I have time to do that. This is just an investment on my part. And there's, you know, or absolutely, I'll get that back to you later on. Nothing comes back the next day. Hey, ... was just really wiped yesterday. And it's like, what the hell do you think this is? Like, and I'm not being a hard ass about it, you know? It's just, I would never communicate that way. And so it puts a wedge in between me and whoever I'm trying to deal with. You know, you've got or even if it's an institutional client, you're dealing with, and this is, I mean, I didn't introduce myself as such, but I have a film and television background prior to high finance. So on that side, you'd be talking to millennial junior studio executives who would sign off with like whatevs. You think, I mean,
is that, so are you saying that that's consistent across the millennials that you've managed?
It's the only experience I've ever had. I've never had an experience. This is why I'm always saying to Hesse and Amy, introduce me to more millennials that you guys know, because the only experience I've ever had is like that. You know, smiley face text messages and I mean, this is in a business environment, not you know, friends or friends of the family or whatever who are millennials. And that communication is just like, I felt the boomers groomed us very well in terms of being able to communicate. I never communicated that way with the superior of the next generation, and they didn't communicate with me that either. They didn't communicate down to me. I didn't communicate up to them. It was very polite, and that is just freaking gone. And that is what I find most of all. Just, it starts you off on the wrong foot. It's like you have a sales meeting, a business meeting. I don't know if you're in sales or whatever, and you show up in ripped jeans and a T-shirt, and you're selling a multi-million-dollar tech solution. You are not going to make that sale. And then they'd wander off going, well, gee, I don't understand. I thought the pitch was pretty good. It's like, you couldn't dress yourself. Like, how were they supposed to think you were going to handle their account well if you couldn't put on clothes without holes in them? And I just find that with communication, that does the same thing.
So do you think, and maybe this question should go to Samantha, who's making a weird face right now, because this obviously isn't across the board with your generation, but are millennials coming into the workforce? Are they ready to actually, move into that role? As Ryan says, maybe not.
So I will preference that I've been working since grade 9. So I mean, like, again, I don't know how many people have done that. But when I worked at universities and when I worked with students who go through co-ops, when you are given automatic co-ops, so if you're in a co-op stream, you almost guaranteed a co-op spot. You get accustomed to being, oh, there's jobs everywhere, and I can just la la la, and here I go, and it's great. And then also we have these incubators, and I do love incubators. I think entrepreneurial spirit is fantastic and growth, that sort of thing. But they'll be like, you are like the best person in the entire world, so you can do whatever you want. People are going to love you, and like you are like the sole like savior of this generation. And people believe that and eat it up, and they go into the workforce thinking this. In nonprofits, especially with granting, you have to be so high on your communication game and your professionalism that that's all you do, because you're constantly working with government agencies, you're constantly looking to make sure that you can have growth within your organization. If Tiffany and I walked into a granting whatever and we were wearing ripped jeans, they would not give us a second thought. They would just be like, nope, I'm done. So I mean, like, maybe that's something where I'm constantly making sure that my organization has funding, so I'm always putting them on the best front. But I think that's also a nature of being told that there's always going to be a job and then treating like the world like that.
Yeah, and I honestly, Ryan, even though Tiffany did put a smiley face up on the chat, I mean, it's not necessarily indicative of what how that generation communicates.
Well, and Hesse, to be honest, granted, the smiley face is snide, but I'm telling him, tell the millennials you're working with, not us on this panel, in real time, because unfortunately, a lot of people, millennials or whatever age, I manage people that are not in my generation, that there are challenges, and they've been working longer than I have been alive. So the same type of conversations that we're having here about these individuals, whether it be generation or type of person or whatever, they're not being told, the actual individual. So how are we expecting them to learn outside of reading some pissed off media article about how much we suck in the workforce? Tell them. Tell us in real time. We need to know those things. And yeah, people may be mad, and those people that quit aren't the people that you want on your team anyway, because they're not mature enough to handle the job. But I don't think maturity is limited to a generation. And I think there is definitely, as Michelle mentioned, there's something to be said about actual years and experience. Life happens, and you don't know how to handle things until you've handled those things. You can preach and expect all of the things you want to handle, but until you're faced with it, you don't know. But I mean, I put the smiley face, but that's not how I communicate, because if I wanted to say something seriously, I don't text. I don't send it an email. I go and talk to that person in person, because I need them to see my face. I need them to hear my voice, and I need them to understand that there are next steps, there are implications regardless of their age, because if they're on my team, whether I'm their manager or their coworker or however that situation works out, their appearance, their voice, their word choice reflects on me. Before I worked for a nonprofit, I worked for the Chamber of Commerce, so I was in a suit every day. There was no way in the world that I could imagine going into a meeting with my hair not done, with my pants not ironed, because that was the environment that I chose to enter. I didn't have to be told how to do those things, but there were definitely people, in our organization that were gently and then not so gently informed. And I don't know that millennials or anyone else right now that's in the workforce is getting that, because we're very concerned about PC, we're very concerned about HR, and we should be. No one wants to be sued. But we are avoiding real conversations that mentors traditionally would have been able to tell someone. They would have been able to pull them to the side that wasn't their boss and say, that outfit's not going to do it for you. If you want to be taken seriously, you're going to have to change this. If you want to move into the next job, you're going to have to change this. We don't have a lot of people willing to do that in the workforce right now, of any generation.
Yeah. At least in my job, which is similar to Tiffany's, I get to approve either giving out co-curricular record, so like saying on their transcripts that they did something. And I openly will tell students, you're not getting it because you haven't done X, 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 X. And these are reasons, if you want to apply for this job next year, apply to be on like a volunteer position, you have to up your game here before you're going to get my recommendation, period.
That's perfect. I mean, Mary actually said it in the chat. You said idiots are not, what did you say again? Idiots are not limited to generation.
They're not generational. I know. I graduated with people that showed up at job interviews looking like this, and I don't think even still. You're saying millennials need to hear this. Millennials need to know this. I don't think it's a matter of millennials not hearing it. I think it's a matter of it's not possible to fire somebody these days. It's not possible to come up. You have to document. I can tell you horror stories about trying to get people fired for things that they did, but so the professional accountability isn't there because the legal aspect is behind it. It's not generations. There's idiots across every generation. I mean, look at for the hippies. There's countless examples across the board. Somebody said that there's more now. There's more now because there's more population, because there's more reporting on it, because there's more media, there's more coverage. It's not more proportionately. It's just talked about more. Again, and this is another topic that this isn't something that was talked about. If somebody got fired, it was very hush-hush. It was, oh, that person's just gone, and the rumor mill went. It wasn't that it was openly addressed, that this person didn't know how to dress professionally, didn't know how to communicate professionally, didn't know how to fulfill their job responsibility. That wasn't an open discussion like it is now. And even though the open discussion is there now, the legal aspect of, oh, well, even if we fire them, they can go get unemployment, has created this logjam that the people aren't being disciplined for the things that are wrong.
Right. You know what? I want to segue into the next question because I think we've exhausted this one, but there was a stat actually that came out, and this speaks to what Samantha was talking about, the fact that there's a lot more contract people within this generation. In fact, they're going to drive towards a more entrepreneurial society just because of the volatility of the economy. And Pam Ross, who actually sent me her book on workplace invention, I read the stat in her book that said that we're seeing a depressing workplace engagement trend where 70% of employees are either apathetic or downright disengaged in their work. So what that means is that a derivative of that is that 70% are not reaching their full potential and 18% actually hate their jobs. So I want you guys to talk about that. Are you disengaged, first of all? And what drives you crazy about your current workplace, whether or not it be situations or whether or not it be, managers or whatever. Why are you, if you are, disengaged? Now, this is hard for Michelle because because you're an entrepreneur, Michelle, and I want to. Yeah, I know, but can I ask?
If I'm not engaged, I'm screwed.
I know. And this is a really important point because, but for a lot of the people that are entrepreneurs, they have no choice but to be engaged, and that they rely on no one else but themselves to move forward. But this brings up the point of why we have an increasingly entrepreneurial workforce, because of there are certain economic things happening, but also what's happening at work that people are not happy. Can anybody weigh in? Steve, can you weigh in? I mean, I know you're independent, but you still work for a company.
Totally, always have. Wow. Why are people disengaged? So we have raised an attitude of narcissism. And it's been evolving over a course of generations, I believe. Where I think some of the chat that I'm seeing here is, we make people out to be the best. They are unchallengeable. They're right. If somebody doesn't agree with you, leave. I mean, there's no cooperation. There's no cooperative engagement. Everybody's for themselves. even with online, the conversations that I keep hearing about, you know, Ryan talking about how people communicate, Tiffany talking about how people dress. We're never taught respect for anybody else. All we're taught is, or teaching is, do it for yourself. And if it's not good for you, run. Get out, jump over, whatever you have to do, just get past it. And that is indicative of why people are disengaged, because people just aren't that way. They need to be engaged. They need to feel a part of something. Even though they don't want to necessarily admit it, if you don't keep people engaged, they'll never be engaged. If you push them away by telling them it's your way or the highway, you suffer the consequences.
Do you think that we're in a survivalist mode right now?
Totally.
I mean, okay, and so from that perspective, companies are as well. So when budgets are cut, when clients leave, guess who the first people are the first to go as a resource.
Always.
So from that perspective, there's a justification as to why they're not engaged. So are we surprised that loyalty is fleeting right now?
Well, I don't think engagement and loyalty are really the same thing. A good manager, somebody that's engaged with their employees, you know, the one thing I've always said to people that I've hired, I can't guarantee what's going to happen, because nobody can. The only thing I can guarantee you is you're going to be better off going out than you were coming in.
Okay.
And prepare people for what may happen, whether they make the choice or the company has to make the choice. But that's all part of mentorship. And usually if you do it right, it survives the current business relationship to the point where you're engaged with people that you've worked with well past the employment state, not as friends, but as networks. And a lot of it has to do with communication skills and respect and helping people deal with the eventuality of what's going to happen, whatever it is.
Now, Ryan, do you agree with that? Because there's this thing, and my parents have always talked about what Steve talked about, this idea of respect. And I don't know, and I haven't seen it necessarily from my generation, because from growing up, it's you earn the respect, and I think boomers, you've espoused that, and my parents have always talked about that, when you get to a point where you do earn that respect. But at the same time, Brian, what do you think? I mean, is this indicative of how you think the current workforce is like?
I don't know. I think there's two kinds of respect you're talking about. I think there's the automatic respect that you give to an elder. I fall into that category for the next generation now, that I would give to someone who's older and wiser and more experienced than I am. Versus the professional respect for the individual's accomplishments. So I know fund managers that are 25 years older than me that manage much smaller funds. They get my respect as an elder, period. Like right out the gate. It's not, well, you've sort of, your performance hasn't been, that's irrelevant. They get it absolutely automatically, and even if they say, oh, you don't have to be so formal, I can't shake it and I don't really care to. In a business sense, in a formal setting, for sure. In terms of professional respect, I mean, I work in a freaking hedge fund, so this is a tank of sharks, right? Like, you earn it or you get eaten, and you get nothing from me. Because, every day I wade into an environment which is a zero-sum game. If I make $10 million, I took it from some other guy like me, and I beat him to death with a rusty pipe. So, it's not elegant, it's not 10 paces and well met, good sir, and all this bullshit. It's like a gladiator ring. So if you can survive that, well, you get my professional respect piled on top of the other one.
So is it different for, let's say, Tiffany and Samantha? Because if this is a survivalist game, okay, so respect is one thing, but do you guys ever think that you're going to go up this corporate ladder? Does it exist for you guys?
Kind of, but I think like many other millennials, when we think of the corporate ladder, we're thinking of instead of going up, we're kind of thinking like this. And then, oh, okay, now I can go into a different field with this and go up here. So, like, even I started within the realm of policy, and somehow I'm now entering communications, and that's where I'm really loving it. And so I think when we're looking at corporate ladders, it's no longer linear to us. And I think that changes a lot of the ways that we conceptualize things. And for me, like, I'm 2 months out almost to the day of my current job when I move back, and I'm done, and then I'll have to start looking for something else or whatever happens in my way. And I think we're very much used to that. We're very much used to this, okay, we're in this nebulous now, what skills have I taken from my last job and what can I use for the next thing? And I think what really makes me sad is that one of the jobs that I had when I was in university, I was there for 3 years, and I really enjoyed the people that I worked with. And I really enjoyed the respect that I had built up with the team, and I was treated not just like a junior employee, but as someone who was going to grow into that job. So I think that's something that I miss, because we're not in a job for longer than a year now. And we can't build up to that respect, and that, like, you can build up to the genuine respect of someone who's your boss or a coworker, that sort of thing, but it's not like the respect for the organization that I built within 3 years.
Right, right. Very good. No, I love that. And Tiffany, do you echo that?
I do, but kind of as we joke in the millennial, I'm in the millennial think tank, I'm kind of the older millennial. And so I've been in the workforce for a little bit longer than Samantha, and I have been in jobs for longer than a year because I work in more traditional types of organizations. So I worked for a PR firm, I worked for a chamber of commerce, and now I work for a nonprofit in workforce development. We're not going anywhere. I mean, at least that organization isn't. And so when I came on board, I took a role that didn't have a next step. That was the role, and I accepted that knowing there weren't going to be any other advancements. But then things changed because of what I was able to accomplish in that role, and also because someone left, someone retired, and rather than filling it with a new person, they said, hey, we bet you could do this too. So here's some extra work to do, which isn't a bad thing. It's a great thing. And when I started 3 years ago, I couldn't have expected the promotion that I have now and the new job responsibilities, because at that time the corporate structure didn't include that. But through, I would love to say, you know, my hard work, but also just changes, it created an opportunity for me. So I'm in a role that I very well could stay for 15 years, or I could leave next year. A lot of that depends on the continued movement of the organization. But I also, I mean, I know a lot of people that have never had a non-contract job. And so if that's your expectation, that every 6 months, 12 months, 18 months you might be moving on to a new employer, then the investment in that business is not going to be there, because it's going to be the investment in your skills, whatever you can learn in that short period of time, and then you move on. So it's also, you know, the type of jobs people are looking for and the expectations they have. I may be here for 15 years, and that would be great. But I would be a very, very small minority within my generation if that's what ends up being the case.
Yeah. And for the most part, I think it's like what Samantha says, it's the expectation, but on the other side, it could also be a choice, correct? So, Michelle, I want you to kind of weigh in, as we only have like a couple of minutes left. And from your perspective, as a boomer, and realizing that you're also an entrepreneur, but I guess at some point you were an employee. Is that correct? What do you think of all this? Like in terms from the discussion that we've had overall, about loyalty, about where you are right now, and maybe you can have some salient advice for these millennials.
I don't know about advice, because the way I look at things, I really think a lot of things boil down to personal development. And I think too many times people look outside of themselves for answers, and they need to spend more time learning who they are. Who are you? What are your strengths? Stop trying to fix your weaknesses and completely embrace your strengths. That's how you bring your passion and your genius together and can integrate it and then really stand in a space and contribute.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts as I close up? Anybody? No? This has been great, and I'm glad actually everybody still has their heads, right? Ryan, you actually weren't that combative. I was like,
oh, come on, you brought two really smart, capable millennials. You didn't
that was a
bring
point.
the ones that I don't get along with. You probably don't know any of those.
I don't know anybody, and anybody that's related to
Tiffany's funny. She said I should throw strength finders at annoying millennials. Actually, you know, Tiffany, I think that the work that Sally Hogshead does with Fascinate is far more helpful than strength finders. It doesn't go into enough depth. It doesn't really help you get to know how other people see you.
That's funny. Okay,
she
on that note,
commission for that.
Oh, absolutely. And I am so glad you guys came on board, because you know what, there were disparate opinions, but one thing I realized is that we're all really not too far apart. I think we're us all experiencing the same kind of conditions that we are today kind of makes us all move towards a certain survivalist mode, and maybe that's a good thing, right? Because it makes us a little bit more pragmatic about things.
Hessie, before you close out, can I point something out that I saw last night in a TV show that I think is really critical? I don't know if you guys ever watched Scorpions, but that's that group of like really genius younger kids, and then there's this one woman who, you know, she feels she's normal. She helped them in a situation where they were trying to find peace, where everyone was trying to be brilliant, or everyone was trying to follow, here's protocol, and she took it down to the base level of what actually do they all have in common, get them connected there, and then you can start having a real conversation. And I don't understand why people don't go, okay, I see our differences, but what do we have in common? And then how do we build from there?
Exactly. It's the reason why we do this, Michelle, because it's not a generational thing, it's a people thing, right? And we need to come to figure out the common ground. And you're right, it's not what separates us.
We've lost the art of communication.
Exactly. I love that. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And by the way, I just wanted to note that tomorrow, Samantha, you're hosting the Boomer Think Tank tomorrow, right? What's the topic?
It is ethical and social responsibility, and we're going to be focusing on consumer habits.
Okay, very good. Thanks. And on that note, I wanted to say goodnight and thank you, everyone, for coming. We're going to have to hold this again, and at some point, somebody's going to have to bring up what's the topic, the common topic again that we're going to talk across generations. So we'll start brainstorming on that. And on that note, everyone have a good night, and we'll be back tomorrow on Boomer Think Tank. Take care.